Meet Lorenzo. The apartment door slams shut, rattling the furniture. He sinks into the sofa, still holding the takeout bag after his girlfriend stormed out, their argument still echoing in his mind. "You're never present," she said with her arms crossed. "You go to work, you come home tired, and then you completely check out." He wanted to defend himself. He almost did, but she wasn't wrong. Now the muffled sounds of jazz come through the open window, New Orleans in the background, vibrant, full of life. But Lorenzo feels numb. He opens the container of fries. He's not even hungry, but the stress grips to his body and he's craving comfort. Lorenzo used to thrive with challenge. He was once a star athlete, full of discipline, confidence, purpose. But now, as director of employee health services at a hospital, it feels like his days just blur by. He manages reports, sits in on meetings, advocates for his ideas at an organization that barely stops to breathe. His ideas get shelved. His efforts go unnoticed. And that version of himself that he once admired, that guy feels like a complete stranger. Most days, he reminds himself to be grateful. He's got a good job. He's got a good life. But that voice inside, the one that whispers, "You were meant for more," keeps getting louder. He doesn't talk about it much. Not the weight gain, not the fact that he avoids looking in mirrors or that he sleeps so many hours and still feels tired. He's the one people lean on. So he doesn't even know how to ask for help. But lately he's been wondering if all the pressure that he's been feeling is not a sign of failure, but an invitation. Maybe it isn't about pushing harder. Maybe it's about reconnecting to something deeper. Today, I'm speaking with Caleb Campbell, West Point graduate, former NFL linebacker, and global keynote speaker who helps leaders unlock their inner advantage. Caleb's story about burnout, identity, and resilience has helped leaders move from pressure to purpose. And I can't wait to hear what Caleb would offer to someone like Lorenzo to help him to stop just surviving the weight of expectation and to start leading from within. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. Caleb, we're going to get to Lorenzo's story here in a bit, but you have a fascinating story that I read about. And I want to hear your story, especially around being drafted into the NFL, having this opportunity, and then it being taken away from you. Walk me through what that was like for you and what it taught you.
Oh my gosh, big question. And also, thanks for having me on the show, man. I love what it's all about. Yeah. I always say there's the story, and then there's the story behind the story. And it's always the latter one that has created the lasting transformation in my life. And it seems to be true today as well. You know, there's a story that we're always living, but then there's always a story behind the story. And so on the surface, there was, a graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point. My sophomore year at the academy, I had a breakout season as one of the top collegiate football players in all of college football for my position. And then my junior year, I had the honor of putting a C on my uniform, which stood for captain. And then my senior year, I found myself arguably where every football player dreams about being at some point in time. And that was at the time in the iconic Radio City Music Hall in New York City, where I was personally attending the NFL draft, given an invitation from Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL. And I was there and, with 10,000 screaming fans chanting my name as Roger Goodell, which he's never done before, walked to a podium on the second day of the draft and announced to me, the 10,000 screaming fans, and the 36 million people tuning in from their homes, that the Detroit Lions had just selected me in the NFL draft, which made me the second player out of the history of West Point to ever get selected, and the first player ever given the permission to play and serve at the same time, according to a new policy that was implemented by the Department of Defense my sophomore year at the academy, that was allowing service academy graduates from West Point, Navy, and Air Force to play and serve simultaneously if they had a professional contract. And the pressure began to mount well before this, but this was kind of a tipping point where shortly after getting drafted, I was on national television doing an interview with, at the time, ESPN host Trey Wingo. And Trey, he looked at me and he said, Caleb, I need you to know something. This is on national television. He says, you're not just any athlete. He said, you're America's athlete. You're a West Point graduate. You're an Army officer. And now you're an NFL athlete. How does it feel? And I know Trey, he meant well when he said this. And I've had my own bouts with imposter syndrome leading up to this moment. But when this moment happened, imposter syndrome came in like a damn tsunami. It just rushed over me. And there was a part of me that was excited, but then there was a bigger part of me that was just terrified, because there was just this realization that everyone was watching. And now there's this heaviness of expectations that just suffocated the joy right out of this experience. And, sitting there on national television, I remember thinking to myself, like, if he actually knew what was happening in here, like, he would quickly see that America's athlete is the furthest thing from the truth. But what I heard is, Caleb, failure is not an option. What I heard is, Caleb, don't you dare mess this up. What I really heard is, Caleb, don't you dare be weak. Have it all together. And so from a young age, growing up in the Texas Panhandle, I quickly learned how to compartmentalize the fear and push it to the side while perfecting this facade, so that on the outside looking in, it looked good and great. I had it all together all the time, even though that was hardly ever my truth. And so sitting there on national television, I relied heavily on what I knew. Compartmentalize the fear, push it to the side, perfect the facade, put a big smile on my face, shake my head up and down and say, Trey, I've never been more excited about what's to come. Even though that was the furthest thing that I did, or even though that was the furthest thing from the truth. And, I really did it just because that's what I thought we're supposed to do. Not just men, but leaders, people, have it together all the time. And so the pressure really, really built in. The cracks in the foundation really began to show that night. Shortly after getting drafted, I found myself back at West Point. And I was home for the weekend alone. My roommate, he was on leave. And I remember just being exhausted from the day. Like, I was just at Radio City Music Hall from 6 a.m. in the morning to about 8 p.m. at night, got to West Point around 9:30, 10 p.m. And I saw a few friends who, were congratulating me. And I just wanted to go to bed. My head hit that pillow. And I remember just laying down for the first time that day, feeling like I was finally with the silence of my own thoughts. And I started to replay the day in my mind's eye, like moment for moment, and realizing the magnitude of what just took place. Like 36 million people just watched my story unfold on national television. But as I'm going through this day, I'm realizing that there is nothing in me that's excited about living in the middle of my childhood dream. I am paralyzed with fear, because all I can think about is, my God, what if I don't make it? Like, what if I'm not enough? Yeah. And I will never forget. And I say this story because as soon as that thought became real, like, that heart in me began to pound so viciously. I could feel it thudding in my ears. My hands began to tremble and to shake. My chest began to tighten. I tried to get up because I was so confused and disoriented on what in the hell was actually happening with me right then. And my vision was so blurry. I felt so just kind of disoriented. And there was a subtle ringing noise in the deepest part of my ear. It felt like it was in the middle of my mind, my brain, my head. And it was just growing louder by the moment. And I had no idea what was going on. I literally rolled off of my bed, crawled out of my room across the hallway in the men's locker room, where I reached up and I turned on a shower, and I laid under that rushing water for the next 3 minutes. But my God, it felt like 3 hours. And I thought I was having a heart attack. But what I know to be true now is I was just experiencing my first of many to come panic attacks. And when I look back at that moment, it is so clear to me that this was like the universe's way of holding up this big metaphorical neon sign saying, hey, Caleb, I need you to do life a little bit differently. Maybe I need you to be brave and invite somebody in and to open up about this. But I also knew that that would require authenticity and vulnerability. And at this point in time in my life, my entire identity is found in my ability to have it all together all the time, because that's what was celebrated. That's what was congratulated my entire life since I was just a young boy, especially on the football field. And so that just didn't seem like an option. And so I did what so many of us have done and continue to do, just compartmentalize it, push it to the side, perfect the facade, and do everything I could to continue to move forward. And as you can imagine, that really, really reduced my life. And it not only affected my performance, but it crippled my morale. It challenged the health of my relationships. And most notably, it affected my mental and emotional well-being. And when I started attending off-season workouts with the Detroit Lions, shortly after graduating West Point and right before training camp was scheduled to start, man, I played football better when I was 7 years old and, growing up in Pee Wee football in Texas. I was playing better football then than I was playing leading up into my first debut NFL rookie season. And I just knew it was a matter of time before everyone would see that I'm just a fraud. Like, I'm just somebody that doesn't have what it takes. And it didn't help, like, all the time being at West or being in Detroit. And, there was always the first round draft pick, and then there was me, because I was kind of like the hero story. I was the one that everybody was rooting for. I was the kid that came from just a small Texas panhandle town serving our country. And now I'm an NFL athlete. And so the pressure just intensified more and more and more. And I'll never forget, to get to your point, I woke up on the day I was scheduled to sign my first NFL contract and also start my first NFL training camp. And my agent that morning, he called me and said, hey, you got to get to the stadium. Something is going on. I got to the stadium. They immediately rushed me upstairs. And when I walked into the room, I scanned the room and I quickly realized that anybody that was somebody with the Lions organization was there, a head coach to the president of the team. I walked in, I sat down, and that's when I heard a voice on the other side of this conference phone that was sitting in the middle of that table. And it said, Caleb, this is so-and-so from the Department of Defense, which catches your attention really fast. And he says, that policy that was allowing you to play and serve simultaneously? And I said, absolutely. Like, that's why I'm here. Thank you. I won't let you down. And he said, well, you don't have to really worry about that because that policy no longer exists. You are hereby ordered to return back to active duty immediately, effective today. And we rewrote a new policy. We revised it. And under this new policy, after serving your country for 3 years, if you can get an early release from your commanding officers, and also a new NFL contract, which I don't know if you know this, but they're kind of hard to come by.
Wow.
He said, then you can make your way back to the NFL. Then and only then you can make your way back to the NFL. And I remember sitting there for a moment processing that. And honestly, there was a part of me, as you said, it was devastated that, like, this childhood dream that I had been chasing since I was just a young boy, that I was knocking on the front door of, about to walk through, it was suddenly gone, completely out of my control. And this, the ground that I was standing on that was so seemingly, steady and kind of certain, it was pulled out from underneath me. It was suddenly shaky and wobbly, and everything was now deeply uncertain. And while there was a part of me that was frustrated and confused and angry, I would say there was another part of me, a bigger part of me, that was deeply relieved. And it was because I kind of got a get out of jail free card, in a sense, where, okay, I'm going to go back and serve our country for 3 years, which is why I went to West Point to begin with. Great. Mm-hmm. And you're telling me if I can somehow keep the dream alive, if I can stay in the shape that's required to play at this level, I can make my way back to the NFL if I get a new NFL contract. So in my head, this is 3 years to get bigger, faster, and stronger, so that if this opportunity does come back, that I will be able to essentially outwork this internal fear, this internal deficit, this pressure that I'm feeling in my life, so that when I get back to the NFL, I will be ready. And so that really led me down the next season of my life, where I kept the dream alive for 3 years. I served our country. I got biggest, fastest, strongest I've ever been, got a new NFL contract, found myself running out onto my first NFL field, playing in my first NFL game, really turning a childhood promise that I made to myself when I was just 7 years old into a prophecy for my life. And that is truly the promise that I made to myself is I said that the first NFL game I ever attended in my life is going to be the one that I play in. And I made that childhood promise to myself a reality when I ran out and played in my first NFL game. And I surprised a lot of people. And I surprised myself. Yeah.
Well, Caleb, what I know for sure is that you learned a lot along this journey, much of which, I always tell people, like, I don't like to think of living with regrets, because everything that we learned in the past were from the mistakes we made. Otherwise, we never would have learned them, right? But what I often think is a different way to frame it, which is, if there was a young person right now who was on the same trajectory as you were, and you could meet that person early on where they were having the same kind of internal pressures, the identity that they were holding on to about this one thing and being that perfect person, what do you think would be the lesson that you'd want to teach that person at a younger age? Like, what is it that you'd want to impart onto that person early on, rather than waiting till it gets to the point where there's, panic attacks and that sense of internal burnout?
Yeah. I think it was Brene Brown who talks about, like, what we celebrate, we fear that we are not. I think that's what she says. And there was I think for a lot of high achievers, not just athletes, but just high achievers, high performers, people who have that kind of that innate inner drive to do something remarkable with their lives. They want to move beyond the status quo. For a lot of us, we are celebrated the most when we are scoring those hypothetical touchdowns, those metaphorical touchdowns, when we're winning, and we are congratulated and we are celebrated. And there's a part of us that so easily gets so intertwined with that success. And it gets so convoluted so quickly, even though we can maybe intellectually understand that we are not our success. There's something in us that, basically goes a lot deeper than what we can intellectually believe. And as a result, I think there comes a time when a lot of us just start ignoring the I don't want to call them red flags, but ignoring the invitations to not just be a successful entrepreneur or a successful athlete, but to be a whole person. And these moments, these invitations, which can look like the fear of failure, which could be imposter syndrome, which could be self-doubt, which could be all of these uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable emotions and feelings that we have in our experience, like having the courage to befriend them, to deploy a little bit of curiosity around them, and to bring them to the forefront of your life, and to invite in trusted people that have earned the right to hear your story, and to allow those people to truly see us, to really see us and be honest about where we are. My God, that will put you leaps and bounds ahead of somebody that solely focuses on performance and outcomes every day.
Yeah. There's this a sense of being able to notice the disruption, the triggers, and to recognize that there's something there where you can learn a valuable lesson. There's something there that is opening you up to some growth lesson. I mean, in other words, like, when things are nice and easy and smooth, there isn't much that you're going to learn during those times, right? And so what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is for someone who is maybe younger or beginning to want to be able to improve in a lot of these areas, most mentally, emotionally, the best thing you could do is to be hyper aware and curious about any triggers, any disruptions that are coming up for you day in and day out.
Yeah. I think for somebody that is so heavily focused, even myself today, like, as a keynote speaker, I have these goals in my life, these goals require me to reach certain benchmarks for me to succeed in certain ways. So I'm always kind of climbing and doing my best to climb this upward trajectory. But the difference now is that when the fear of not being enough surfaces in my life, I don't see it as something that I need to beat. I see it as something that I need to tend to, that I need to befriend, that I need to get close to, because the weight of success on a fractured life is always going to increase the fracture. And so externally succeeding at the cost of internal wholeness is not winning. It's not succeeding. Like winning and losing yourself in the process, it's not success.
Right.
And so I've come to this realization that success is no longer about how much we can carry, right? But how good we can feel while carrying it.
Yeah.
And that's the turning point. So it's more than just like befriending our emotions or the insecurities or whatever the triggers that might surface. It's a complete paradigm shift in how we are doing this. And where the goal isn't just to win or to achieve the success or the award, the goal is to become the whole person we are capable of becoming. And ironically, what ends up happening oftentimes is as I pursue wholeness, the success usually follows. And the beautiful part about that is I actually have the capacity to enjoy the success.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of losing it. I'm not the weight of it, the responsibility, the visibility, the vulnerability that comes with it. It doesn't crush me. It doesn't leave me soul tired. And that's the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a powerful statement I think it was on your website. It said, it isn't about surviving the pressure. It's about using it as a catalyst for something deeper.
Absolutely.
So how does one make that transformation, Caleb?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a few different, things that you could, or a few different paths that we could start wandering down. But for me, there is just an endless curiosity that is a non-negotiable. That if love, let's say love is holding this all together, and you can define love. Let's say love is holding this all together. Love is inexhaustible. And because love is inexhaustible, love is always inviting us into a deeper experience, right? More satisfaction, more fulfillment, greater ease, greater success, more presence, more joy, more wholeness. It's always inviting us into a deeper experience with life. But the fact of the matter is that we cannot become what we want by remaining what we are. So the prerequisite to stepping into this, I call it expansion, the prerequisite to stepping into this next season of expansion in our lives, whether that's more fulfilling relationships, whether it's greater job alignment, whether it's living in more fulfillment, you get to define what it is. The prerequisite for that is oftentimes letting go of the parts of us and our stories in our lives that we have outgrown. And so there has to be this endless curiosity. Rumi is one of my, favorite Sufi poets, and he says essentially this idea of like all emotions are visitors. It's from a poem called The Guest House. And he was like, when these emotions, when these guests are knocking on your heart's door, invite them in. Give them a seat at the table. Listen to what they have to say, right? Maybe, just maybe, they are bringing you a new delight, right?
Yeah, even if they've, I love the poem.
Yeah,
even if they've ripped up the furniture,
even if they just, like even if they reorganize the familiarity of your living room, like give them a seat. They have something to say, and so there is just this. And let me tell you, Jay, I used to be the least self-aware person you have ever met in your life. And self-awareness, it is a muscle. So practicing self-awareness, deploying that self-awareness, having a posture of curiosity around, that's interesting that I would respond in that way. I wonder what that means. And sitting with that, there's this equal thing happening simultaneously. There is our pursuit for external growth. And then simultaneously, there's this internal deepening happening, an inner growth that is happening. And that is so vastly important because it's that inner growth that creates the foundation to sustain the external pursuits so that we can win and not lose ourselves in the process.
So when you just said a moment ago, it got me curious that you weren't such a self-aware person. Clearly you are now. Okay. So when I hear that, I get curious as to what were the levers that you pulled.
Yeah.
In other words, if we think about tools or practices or things that you have within your own routine, Caleb, that help you to be able to continue to flex that muscle.
Yeah.
What's worked for you? And I know that what's worked for you may not work for everybody, but I just get curious as to what worked for you.
Yeah. I remember when I left the NFL, I moved to Canada. I became a janitor of an organization. I slept on a basement floor of a boiler room for the next 5 years of my life because even though I made it to the NFL, I returned back 3 years later. I was externally successful, but my God, I was internally bankrupt. And I realized that like the way I was doing life, the ruthless ambition, the hustle over heart, the pushing forward at all costs while compartmentalizing the fear and pushing it to the side and perfecting this facade, like that approach to life, it worked. It got me to the height of my dreams playing in the NFL, but it came at a great cost. Meaning one night waking up after partying, one morning waking up after partying in the middle of my childhood dream and looking at my bedside table and seeing the mixtures of uppers and downers and realizing that I wasn't just partying. I was actively trying to make myself disappear. Something had gone terribly awry. Right? My success, it wasn't a life to enjoy. It felt like a burden to carry. And I was as unhappy as I could possibly imagine. And so here I am realizing something needs to change. And that's when I left the NFL and moved to Canada, like I just mentioned, became a janitor. And I started to just look at the deeper underbelly of my life, started to just create this space to work with somebody that could help me better understand what in the hell just happened. And at this point, I realized that there was kind of this, it was so interesting. I started to notice some patterns in my life. Just by slowing down a little bit, I started to notice some patterns. And every Friday morning, it was like 8 a.m., I would have this deep urge to drink. And there was a story that would go off of like, oh, you worked hard this whole week. You earned it. Let's go have a little moment where you can just relax. I would find one of the few bars at this time that was open at 8:30, 9 in the morning. And the company in a bar at first thing in the morning is always quite interesting.
Yeah.
And I would find myself in this pattern of getting drunk, spending the whole day drunk, doing something stupid, feeling the shame the next day, hating myself, going back the next week, getting through the week, just to repeat the pattern again and again and again. And I realized that there's that old Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is that space. And in that space is our power to choose. And what we choose greatly controls the quality of our lives. That if I really started to dissect this and peel back the layers, there's a moment in every weekend, every Friday morning, where there's a thought process that I had, a story that was so deeply ingrained that it felt just like me. But there was a story that I'm telling myself. Yep. And that story would trigger an emotion, a feeling that I needed to satisfy, a loneliness, an ache, something. And so that would result to the bar. And so I knew that if I wanted to change the pattern of my life, I would have to change, and I'd have to own that space between stimulus and response. And so I just started to practice. How can I own that space between stimulus and response? What's the story that I'm telling myself? And I began to write that story down so that I became crystal clear. This is the story that is activating the pattern that's leading me down a series of behaviors that's resulting in me swimming in pools of shame and absolutely hating my life. And every time that story hit, I remember distinctively one moment. They say it takes 3 seconds of courage to change your life. One moment I decided to choose differently. And instead of going to the bar, I changed the story and I said, well, what if that's not true? What if? And I gave myself a different hypothetical. And I remember going to the gym instead of going to a bar. And that taking that action did something for me, but it started by recognizing the stories. And something that I still do today is that I make a physical cue, meaning every time I walk through a doorway, there might be a time where I either practice a quick body scan, I tune into how I feel, or I will periodically, and this works for me because I'm self-employed and I spend time at home and I control my calendar, I will set 10 different alarms throughout the entire day around times that I know that I'm just going to be working on my computer or I'm out and about. And every time one of those alarms go off, I stop what I'm doing, I get out of my head and I get back into my body. I connect to my breath for just 10 quick seconds and I start to observe some of the thoughts that are floating through my head. Yeah. And I'm practicing just some self-awareness. Every time I walk through the door, I do the same thing. I just tune into my body. Whoa, I'm here. Okay. Whoa, I become the observer of my life just for a moment. And you practice that long enough and you start picking up in your everyday life. You start noticing the stories that you're telling yourself. You start noticing the thoughts, sensations, emotions, and feelings that are just coursing through your body. And when you notice it, you realize there's a distance between the two, and I'm not engrossed in it. I'm not lost in it. And this just is constantly building the self-awareness muscles.
I love it. I love it. There's a practice that I oftentimes go through with my one-on-one coaching clients where I have them really observe those emotions.
Yeah.
I have them bring to mind something that triggered them within the last few weeks. And I have them observe the emotion. And then I ask them, if you're observing the emotion, then it must become very clear to you that there is you, right? And there's the emotion, and you're not the emotion. If I look at this pencil, right, Caleb, I can't be the pencil. I'm the one looking at it, right? It's become so self-evident, but it does require practice. Now, in the story with Lorenzo, what you were just describing, he has his own version of that, and that's his tendency to go grab something to eat, have a snack, right? Go to the, like, that's his numbing, right? That's his way of working through whatever the emotion is and pushing through. How would you start with someone like that? Like, what would be, the way in which you would try to work with somebody who has that habit in them so ingrained to be able to get them to start being more observant and noticing the story?
Yeah. When I read Lorenzo's story, I was like, oh, me and him are like best friends. I too go for those cheesy burgers when I'm feeling a little dysregulated.
Right. And it's always based on a true story too, Caleb. Like, there's a person, of course, different name that this is actually really based on. Yeah.
Man, I read the story and I actually got kind of emotional because it felt real, and also because I found myself in it. And so it was spot on. And, the first thing that I would do with Lorenzo is really slowing down for a moment and just checking in as a simple reminder that, my God, it all makes sense. It makes sense. You make sense. And there is absolutely nothing broken in you. Nothing broken in you. And I always find that it's so terrifying and frustrating. But if you're willing to sit with it just for a moment, you also see how expansive the opportunity is with where Lorenzo is in his life. Because from the way that I see it, and what I would hope for him to understand in shifting his paradigm, is that the current way of doing life, while it got him the beautiful life that he has created, right? It has come to its expiration date. It is not the way of life, meaning the beliefs, the patterns, the thoughts, the approach. It's not going to take him to where he wants to be. And so we're standing on the edge of a threshold. And to cross over that threshold means to exit one room and to step into what, the ancient mystics would call liminality, a liminal space, a space between what was and what will be. And then we will step over that next threshold into the next season of expansion for our lives. The thing with the threshold is that liminality, that liminal space, it's, ancient mystics would call it God's waiting room, because it's where transformation happens. It's where you meet some higher source. The Native American tribes would call it crazy time, because it feels like you're going crazy. The thing about liminality is that when you're exiting one season of life and stepping into the new, and the new has not yet emerged, we can't rush it. That season of unknown is the greatest gift for us. And so I think just offering a bigger picture of knowing where you can locate yourself on a map. Oh my God. Yes, my life is so tense right now. I'm having blow up arguments with the significant other in my life. I'm in a job that I should be grateful for, but I have lost myself and it's so unfulfilling and deeply unsatisfying. And I'm not happy. On paper, it looks all good and great, but I'm not happy. And I am absolutely disgusted with myself. And I have these patterns that reinforce that sense of self-hatred towards myself. Wow. Yes. You have created this scenario. You are in this experience because the current way of doing things have come to an end, and you are invited to expand your life. Growth is inevitable. Congratulations. Like, we have reached that upper limit. Gay Hendricks, he talks about that in his book, The Big Leap. Like, we all have an upper limit. And when we hit that upper limit, it feels deeply, deeply uncomfortable and unsatisfying, because it looks just like complete and utter chaos in your life. But you are on the edge of something so beautiful. So first, opening up the paradigm, creating some room to breathe, like, aha, yes, congratulations, I'm expanding. What a beautiful invitation that we are being invited into. The important thing to know about crossing over the threshold and that liminality, that space of liminal, it can't be rushed, it can't be skipped over, and we can't control how long it takes. And so there is a letting go of control.
Which is not easy.
No, it's not easy at all, especially when our life has been built by some, clinging to some false sense of security, safety, and control. Yeah. But the beautiful thing about that space is it is so full of tension. And the tension undoubtedly is going to surface the things that need to be left behind in this season of life. Whether it's the thought processes, whether it's, the belief systems, whether it's some patterns, some actions, some behavior, some relationships, some friendships. And I always find that for us to step over this threshold, it requires capacity. It requires space. One question that I would ask Lorenzo straight up is, what are you holding on to in your life right now that you know you need to let go of? And it could be video games. It could be a toxic friendship. It could be a relationship. Is there something in your life that you know right now that you want to let go of, that you can say no to, that you can create some harsh boundaries? Is it uncomfortable? Yeah, but staying in a life that you've outgrown is way more uncomfortable. Choose your uncomfort. Choose your discomfort.
Yeah. Right? And what I think is happening too, and I think this is a lot of the times when we're in those spaces that you're talking about, is you said invitation. I sometimes will use the term, there's a calling, like you're being called to something. But in order for you to be able to answer that call, you do need to have quiet in your own mind. Yeah. Right. In other words, like the problem that I think is happening is that we are so in our heads of thought after thought after thought after thought, spinning, that we don't have the space. We don't have the quiet space to be able to really hear it and then cultivate the courage to act on it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. It's such a timely reminder to just get still, get still. I've realized that my life has never been really about the pursuit of success as much as it was about the avoidance of stillness.
Wow.
Because in the stillness,
that's a great way to put it, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the stillness, I had to be present with all the things that I was outrunning, but all of the things I was trying to outrun is actually my greatest invitation for growth.
Yeah.
And so, that get stillness. And so I always try when I'm working with people to open up the story. You can never read the pill label inside the pill bottle kind of idea, right? And so if we can open up the story and locate ourselves on the map, that's the first step. And then with Lorenzo, the first thing, what I would love for him to do is I would love to take him down an exercise of meeting his loyal soldiers. And what that means is back in World War II, there was a story. I was just writing about this in my book, actually. That's why it's probably front and center. Is in World War II, there's a bunch of pilots that were shot down over a deserted island. True story, actually. And they were lost at sea for almost 2 or 3 years, I want to say. And they were discovered. They were all thought to be dead, and they were discovered. And when they were rescued, their first statement that came out of their mouth, their first ask is, send us back to war, send us back to battle. We want to fight. But what they didn't know is that the war was over. Battle was done. They could go home now. It's safe. Lorenzo, us, all of us, we all have loyal soldiers. We have parts of us that fight for our survival. They're the perfecters, the performers, the producers, the achievers, the addicts. There's all of these parts of our stories that come online because they're loyal soldiers. And they have been trained to ensure our safety and our survival, right? And when I say us, there's a little person inside every single one of us. And this story with Lorenzo, there's a little Lorenzo who has heavily relied on his ability to produce, his ability to achieve, his ability to perform, his ability to get the job done. And he does that to ensure his safety and his survival, to protect little Lorenzo, to keep him safe. And they're all loyal soldiers. But these loyal soldiers don't know that the war is over. Lorenzo, little boy Lorenzo, he's out of harm's way. He's safe now. He's built a beautiful life that he can enjoy. He's safe. And so the beautiful exercise that I would take Lorenzo down, that has been such a monumental, repeated exercise that I do in my own life, is what are the parts that are coming up online right now in your life that are kind of creating some tension? And for Lorenzo, it's probably that producer, it is that perfectionist, it's the performer, it's the achiever part of him, and they dominate his life. They get the job done at any cost, even at the cost of his well-being, even at the cost of the relationships that matter the most to him, demonstrated by his girlfriend walking out and saying, "You're never present. You're not here anymore." And so there are these parts that have just absolutely saved Lorenzo's life and ensured his survival and helped him create a big life. But these parts don't know the war is over. And then subsequently, there's a part in Lorenzo. Maybe it is the part of him that wants to be more present in relationships. Let's call it the good partner part, right? That has taken a back seat to his life. And so a simple exercise that I would love to do with Lorenzo is sit him down, and I would love for him to have conversations with these parts. What do you want to say to the parts of you that have ensured your survival? And what do you want to ask of them now? And then also, what do you want to say to the part of you that feels a little underdeveloped, a little shy, a little weak, who hasn't found his voice in this area? What does he need to hear right now? And what we're actively doing is we're teaching the little parts of us where they actually belong in this season of life. I don't need the performer part of me right now, that I need the nurturing part of me as a father of two and a husband. Right? Are they equally important? Absolutely. But the question is how can I be of highest service today?
Yeah.
How can I be of highest service today? And that looks like, yes, on stages, speaking to organizations across all industries in our country. And it also looks like me having the capacity to be so deeply present with my wife and my two children day after day. And so there is an invitation to meet the parts of ourselves that have been abandoned and forgotten. That when you bring them back online, there's a wholeness that begins to percolate up into your life, and you begin to taste something new.
What I really appreciate about the way you're framing this all is that the loyal soldiers that you're referring to, you're meeting with a lot of
honor.
Honor is a great word. Honor, compassion, respect.
They threw these soldiers a parade. We want to throw them a parade. Like they ensured your survival, and now they are overdoing it at the cost of your well-being because they don't know the war is over. How, like, Lorenzo, you're not self-sabotaging, you're self-protecting.
Yeah.
Right? How beautiful.
It doesn't need to be binary either, right? This is the problem I think people fall into. It's either I'm completely fueled by all of it and it runs the show, right? Or I suppress it and I see it as this part of me that I want to shut down and tell it to shut up.
No. I always know when my performer is needed.
Yeah.
I always, like, it comes online and it's activated, but I also know when I need the performer to know that, hey, little boy Caleb, we're safe. We built a beautiful life. We can slow down. We can take some time this weekend. We can really allow ourselves to feel the depth of the joy in this life right now. Like, but here's the thing, like, our capacity, Jay, to feel joy, to feel good is small until you actively work on creating that capacity. I always say success is not the byproduct of hard work alone. Success is the byproduct of creating a nervous system that feels safe with that level of success. For a lot of us, we have grown up in a world where the other metaphorical shoe is going to drop at any point. And so we've got to work harder to outwork that vulnerability. Right? But that's a losing game. We have to learn how to allow ourselves to feel goodness in our life. Our nervous systems, for a lot of us, don't know how to feel good because feeling good is unsafe. Because when we feel good, it's just a matter of time before something else happens. And so we try to beat vulnerability to the punch by not allowing ourselves to feel good. And therefore we stay stuck and not feeling good and trying to outwork ourselves from that place. It will leave you waking up not just with a tired eye, but a tired soul. Yeah. And so that little boy, that little girl, that little one in us, in Lorenzo, just doesn't know how to feel good, doesn't feel safe feeling good. So let's create chaos. Let's create problems. Let's create situations to prevent us from feeling good. But what if we could teach the little one in us that, hey, you're safe and feeling good is allowed. And I'm going to show you what that feels like just for a moment. So the next time you actually achieve something, the next time you win something or you have a good day, before you run to your 5 o'clock cocktail, which I am not judging because I'm all for it. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. You better believe I have become a bourbon snob. But before you congratulate yourselves with pouring a drink, stop. just allow yourself to feel the goodness of your life. Yeah, maybe it's not where you want it to be. Maybe it's not what you expected it's supposed to look like, but just recognize that goodness in your life right now and allow your nervous system, drop your shoulders, let out a little audible sigh. Take a big inhale and exhale and feel the weight of your feet grounded on the ground beneath you. And remember that there is something bigger than your willpower and your ability and your ambition that is holding this all together. You can rest, enjoy it. Teach your nervous system that it's safe being here now.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I like to always do this towards the end of a conversation, Caleb, because I want to give you an opportunity to where you can imagine speaking directly to Lorenzo.
Yeah.
So let's say you were doing a speaking engagement. Lorenzo was there in the audience. He was inspired by your talk.
Mm-hmm.
You get off the stage. You're now speaking with Lorenzo. He comes up to you, tells you his story. And knowing from this conversation how you would most likely approach him is you'd listen, you'd acknowledge him, and you'd go with some questions. You've already surfaced a few, and these are fantastic questions. What do you need to let go of, Lorenzo? That was one. Then you asked, who are your loyal soldiers?
Yeah.
And if you were to then lead him to the next question, something that would help him, something that would evoke something in him, shift that paradigm, what would you ask him? What would you ask him in that moment for him to come to the realization within himself?
Oh, that's a hard question right there. If nothing changes from this moment forward, is it enough? And his answer is going to be no. And that's okay. It should be no. But I think that's where we want to be. We want to be where we are. I just had another question pop up in my head, but it's not a question. I wouldn't ask a question, I don't think. I would say my reminder actually would be is what is always the great teacher.
Tell me more.
What is always the great teacher. We oftentimes find ourselves in these places where life that we have is not the life that we want. And we think that it's going to require us to jump over hurdle 1, hurdle 2, hurdle 3 to get there. And we fail to neglect that what is pressure. What is deep grief. What is great fear. Those are our greatest teachers. And we think that the answer is to get the reward, win the relationship back, or whatever it might be. But the real work is actually being present with the grief, being present with the fear, being present with the pressure. Like that's the greatest teacher. Those are the moments that are going to expand us into something greater. And as a result of spending time with that, usually what happens is our life comes back in greater alignment. But to get back to the original question, if it never changed another moment in your life, is it enough? Are you good? And oftentimes the answer is no. But we have to learn how to accept what is, this radical acceptance of what is, not trying to change anything, but being actually totally accepting of what is. That's where the magic lives. Because you see, it's not that our life is never going to change, but in the acceptance of learning how to dethrone the ambition, the willpower, the deep need for it to look something different, and to be radically present and radically accepting of who I am, all parts of me, and where I am. What ends up happening is you actually move through the fear of your life never changing. And as a result, your life inevitably changes. And so there is this invitation to deeply accept, which is not passive resignation. Acceptance is not passivity. Acceptance is deep, deep, deep courage. It takes tremendous inner work to accept what is. And that doesn't mean things are going to not change. It means oftentimes your fear of things never changing is removed. And that upper, let's call it barrier of your life, that upper limit is removed and your life inevitably changes.
Yeah. It reminds me of an Eckhart Tolle quote where it's something along the lines of treat the present moment as if you designed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. As if like it is exactly how it's supposed to be. It's not supposed
Which is hard to accept. It's hard to accept when you're in a dead-end job, a unfulfilling relationship, when you're buried under mounds of grief and anger. Like it's hard to say, like it's really hard. And I just want to validate that.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. But the point is not to change your external situation. The point is change your internal reality.
Yeah.
Like, that's the real work. That's the gift you're being offered.
Yeah. And then, as you said earlier, then the byproduct will then be
oftentimes
success, right? Then you're going to be able to move forward in a positive direction. Caleb, this was such a fantastic conversation. I am so grateful that we made this happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Out of your day to chat with me. And for anyone listening, I highly recommend learning more about Caleb and the great work he's doing. It's calebcampbell.me. I'll put that into the show notes where people can find out more about you, your socials, as well as the kind of speaking that you do. And I'm sure it's phenomenal just based on this conversation to see you live. Hopefully I get to one day, my friend.
Awesome.
Thank you again for taking time today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
A little behind the scenes for you at the end of this episode. I always listen back to the episode and I make a list of the insights and actionable takeaways. With Caleb's conversation, it was huge. It was enormous. It was really difficult for me to break it down just to 3 insights and 3 takeaways because Caleb dropped so much wisdom on us in this one episode. It was excellent. So I'm going to do my best to give you what I think are the best, but I promise you there's more than what I'm giving you right now. So here we go. First of 3 insights. We are not our success. I have to read word for word some of the things that he said. The weight of success on a fractured life is always going to increase the fracture. Here's the second thing he said. Externally succeeding at the cost of internal wholeness is not winning. So we have to stop identifying with the success and see ourselves as whole people. You are a whole person. You are not defined only by your success. Second insight, befriend your fear. Befriend the distress. Befriend the worry. What I often hear from people is they say, I want to battle my fear or overcome it. It's the wrong paradigm. We have to shift the paradigm. Invite in the disruption. You are a whole person. Be the whole version of you. And what ends up happening is good things. Success follows when you are fully accepting who you are. Third insight, the threshold. I like the term, the threshold. He said, oh, you're feeling uncomfortable? Congratulations. You are expanding. You're crossing over the threshold. Yeah, I know it's not so pleasant. It's not so comfortable, but it's those seasons when you are experiencing the most growth. Actionable takeaways, 3 of them. First one, tap into the observer. He talked about how self-awareness is a muscle, and he gave some really interesting examples of how he practices his own endless curiosity. He said he would notice the patterns, he'd write down the stories, and then he would have physical cues like walking through a doorway, or he'd have alarms to go off that will remind him to observe, to get into his body. You have to find what works for you, but make sure that it's an intentional practice for you to be the observer and notice what's happening in the moment. Second actionable takeaway, meet your loyal soldiers. What a powerful metaphor here of the soldiers that are still wanting to go into battle when the war is over. But what would you do when they returned home? You would throw them a parade. You wouldn't be angry with them. You wouldn't fight with them. You would let them know, hey, the war is over. Well, whenever this comes up for you, that protector in you, that desire in you to be safe, to protect you, to be able to avoid putting you in situations where you could be judged, all those kind of things, befriend them, bring them in, have conversations with them. Third actionable takeaway, allow yourself to feel good. Allow yourself to feel good. It's okay to experience joy. It's okay to feel safe. What happens is when you want, or when you're wired to protect yourself, feeling good is something to avoid, right? You want to stay in a state of anxiety to keep yourself in a state of protection, but you don't have to be in a state of threat or perceiving threats all the time. Allow yourself to be able to enjoy the moments. and to not be always thinking about what's next, what is the next challenge. Celebrate your wins and allow yourself to experience joy. Join us on Friday's episode. I'm going to do a deeper dive into that Rumi poem. It's so interesting he brought it up. I love that poem. I've talked about that poem for years. It has been something that has been very insightful for me. I mentioned in the episode how I bring this up with clients, and we'll do a deeper dive into that poem and the implications that it has on our daily lives. So how do we meet these disruptive emotions when they arise, befriend them, and allow for the fears and the distress and anything else that comes up to not be something that fuels our behavior, where we can meet them, we can listen to them, acknowledge them, and still move in a positive direction. Until next time, thank you so much for listening.